Warning: some contents may be disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised.
This story is really reaching back to a time before all the dating sites were really a thing, and way before smartphones and apps were the center of our lives. Back then, before everything was simplified, I used to be a long-time member of a certain IRC. That's Internet Relay Chat for the kids. These were chat rooms that were more or less embedded on websites, and they were pretty much anonymous in the fact that you had to have a display name, but not much else. Hell, most of them had the feature that let you join in as unnamed guests, and the rooms would sometimes be filled with guest 04253 and such. They were a lot of fun, and I kind of miss those days. But nowadays, the internet is all about look at me specifically, so the idea of anonymity being a core concept is relegated to pretty much just the deep web. Now, despite the fact that there was this layer of anonymity with IRC chat rooms, it was actually quite common to, quote-unquote, find love while chatting with these people. There was a direct message system too, so you could have conversations one-on-one, so you could get to know the person on the other end pretty well, even if there was no way to confirm literally anything that they told you or said. I'm sure that some of the people I spoke with that were interested in me were probably 60-year-old guys pretending to be women in their 20s. And that's okay. I can safely say that this was a long time ago, or that was the old me. But there was one person that I spoke with on these chats that I actually did have a bit of a relationship with, albeit only for a few months. Her username was the title of a song, with some X's and numbers thrown in the mix, but I can safely say that her actual name was Taylor. Taylor was a year older than me at that time. When we met, I was 21 and she had just turned 22 when we met and started speaking. I don't remember why we started talking one-on-one, but we did, and after a while, things seemed to get to a point where we both wanted to start the relationship. Now, long-distance relationships back then were a bit different than what they are in 2023. Long-distance phone calls were expensive, and cell phones had set text and talk minutes, so it wasn't like you could be as close to the other person as you can in the current year. And because of this, we had our IRC conversations, and we had also emailed each other a few times. And before anyone mentions that Taylor was probably one of the 60-year-old men that liked to play the role of a young woman, I actually knew that Taylor was legit. We had sent pictures to each other, including pics to prove that we were real, which was essentially a picture with a date, time, or username written on our hands in Sharpie and then covering one of our eyes. Yes, things were that complex back then. You had to be creative to come up with something that was difficult to fake to prove that you are who you said you were. Now, all of this is to say that Taylor was gorgeous. She was exactly what you would think of when I say a 22-year-old girl that likes to talk in IRC rooms. She had dyed black hair, the color blue eyes, and she liked the color black on everything, and she had a few face piercings. And let me tell you that I instantly fell in love with her. I even told her that she was literally the girl that I was looking for in life, and she thought that it was the funniest thing ever. From there, we did say we were dating actually. We would chat every night, send pics through email of ourselves, and while things never went past PG-13, this was the happiest that I have ever been in my life. We had our little relationship for 3 months, and almost on the dot, and everything seemed great, until there was a stretch of time that she just didn't log on. I didn't see her in our chat rooms, and I would email her, but she didn't reply to me. I was genuinely upset, thinking maybe something happened to her. Maybe she wasn't really as interested in me as she claimed. I was almost heartbroken, thinking that I had messed this up and that this was a once-in-a-lifetime thing that I had ruined. I kept emailing her every night, just hoping that she would see them and send a response like, "Oh, my internet was out for a few days. I'm sorry about that." Or, "I was out of town." I was basically holding out hope that she would say anything to bring it back together. And then, I did get a response, but it was rather strange. It just said, "Hey, hop on IRC." It actually made me almost giddy to hear from her again, so I did what she requested and then I logged in. Immediately, she sent me a DM saying hello, and I replied asking how she was and asking if she was okay. She completely ignored those messages and just said, "What's your address? I want to send you something." I have to pause here to say that I was dumb and I was in love with this girl. So I didn't hesitate at all in giving this random internet person my address. Nowadays, I would be lambasted for doing something so stupid, and rightfully so. But back then, there wasn't really this concept of internet strangers are not your friend. I responded to her and I told her my address, thinking that this was maybe the start of us moving into a more serious relationship. Of course, the response I got back wasn't what I expected, nor what I wanted. The message I got back from Taylor was as clear as day, and I actually remember it word for word. "This is Taylor's husband. Stop messaging my girl, or else you'll be next." And that was it. What I would be next for, I obviously didn't know, but this was pretty clearly a threat. I mentioned that she never told me she was married, and then mentioned that she and I were really good friends, and if he was really her husband, I would respect that. After a few moments of silence, they logged out of the account, leaving me confused, devastated, and just overall feeling betrayed. That was the last time that I ever spoke with that account. They never logged back into the server, and Taylor never responded to any of my emails. So, that was effectively the end of my relationship, but not the end of the story. About 2 weeks later, I actually got a package at my house. The return address just said, Taylor. There was no address or city or anything. It was just her name. I hesitated to open it, thinking that it was going to be something messed up. And well, it was. When I opened the box and moved the packing material, there at the bottom of the box was a kitchen knife. And on the blade of the kitchen knife was a hard, crusty, brown-red substance that I assume was blood. I immediately called the police, telling them to send an officer to my house because I had gotten a package with a potential murder weapon. That was a really fun story to explain to the officer when he got there. Not gonna lie about that. I had to tell him that I had met a girl on the internet and that we were dating, but then her real-life husband had threatened me after I gave him my address, and then today, the package showed up. I feel like if I had told this story this year, it would be less strange. But back in 2003, it was like explaining foreign concepts, and they had a lot of questions. I ended up having to go to the station to pretty much be interrogated. And after answering questions for 4 hours, they decided that I was probably telling the truth, and then they took the knife, saying that they would look into it. I don't know what they were looking into. All I had was her first name, her username, and also a picture of her. I have no idea if their investigation ever went anywhere, nor do I know if that blood was human, but it was definitely sent to me as a threat, and it told me what he meant when he said that I was next. All of this was 20 years ago, and looking back, I kind of miss the old internet. Hopefully this can trigger some nostalgia for your older audience and educate your younger audience on how things used to be. Remember, kids, don't tell strangers where you live. You may end up with a bloody knife in your mailbox. This story started with me getting dumped. I don't want to get into a lot of details about it, but just know that my self-confidence was at an all-time low and I was in desperate need of a pick-me-up. And that's when one of my friends suggested Tinder. Now, I'm not a big fan of hookups or the hookup culture, but maybe because of how I was feeling and my friend's assurance that I just need to get laid, his words, not mine, I decided to download the app and then give it a try. I made a profile and I swiped right on a few girls, but I never got a match. At this point, my already crumbling ego was pretty much reduced to dust, seeing as no one wanted me. I was just about to call it and uninstall the app when I got a message. I matched with someone. Her name was Emily, age 25. Her picture was that of a woman with long, dirty blonde hair and green eyes. I'm going to be honest here. She was pretty, like really pretty, but like far out of my league kind of pretty. And she matched with me? I took a moment of silence to A, thank God for doing me a solid, and B, pray to him that I don't mess this up. So I opened the chat with her and I stared at it. What the hell was I even supposed to say? I was debating between either a cheesy pickup line or just saying hello when she messaged me first. "Hey," she said, spelling hey with 3 Y's, followed by the winking emoji. "I saw your profile. Your dog is cute. What's his name?" I took a mental note to give my dog Marco roasted chicken for tonight for helping me score, before replying telling her his name and breed. "He's such a cutie, kind of like his owner," she said with another wink emoji. I was blushing pretty red when I read that. "So, I usually don't do this, but I really like talking to you," she continued. My heart pounded in my chest as I saw that she continued typing. She asked, "So, do you want to meet up for something?" Score! I took a moment to acknowledge that God did indeed answer my prayers before replying, "Sure, I'd love to." I'm not sure how desperate I sounded, but I hope I didn't scare her off. But apparently not, as she then told me where to meet her and we decided on a date. On the day of, I'll admit that I was nervous. I just hoped that the buckets of sweat that I was sending out wouldn't show on my clothes. I dressed casual but nice, brushed my teeth twice. I showered, put on deodorant, put on some cologne and popped a breath mint before getting in my car and then driving to a location. As I check, it was a cheap hotel, nothing fancy. But given that she was the one who suggested meeting here, My brain flew out the window as my mind was filled with dirty thoughts. And once I arrived at the room, I took a moment to ready myself. I was preparing to enter the room and have the night of my life. I hesitantly knocked on the door, but I got no reply, so I knocked again. Maybe she wasn't here? I took out my phone and I sent her a message asking if she was here. I unfortunately got no response. I decided to simply wait outside in case she was running late or something. But I eventually decided to give her a call after half an hour because at that point, I was of the firm belief that I simply got stood up as a prank. That is, however, until I heard a phone ringing from behind the door. "Emily?" I called as I knocked on the door. I was listening closely before the door opened and a hand grabbed my arm. It wasn't the dainty hand of a woman. This was a large calloused hand, a man's hand. I instantly pulled my arm close and I slammed the door on the guy, getting his wrist caught between the door and the frame. I heard a man's yell of pain behind the door, but I wasn't going to bother looking. I ran from the hotel room to the elevator and I hit the button. And looking back, I saw 3 guys running towards me as I stood there at the elevator. I made a split-second decision and I threw myself into the stairwell before practically jumping down the flight of stairs. I reached the ground floor and I sprinted past the reception before I bolted out that door. I hadn't checked to see if the men were chasing behind me or not, but I simply didn't care. I slammed into my car with my keys out and I hurriedly opened the door. Only once I was inside it with the door locked did I feel safe. After catching my breath in my car and trying to calm down, I then drove off. I uninstalled Tinder on my way home, and to Emily, or whoever was posing as a girl named Emily on Tinder, I don't know what you were trying to do, but I pray that you never succeed. Dating has always been rough for me. I thought that after coming out as a lesbian, things would get better. Oh, how wrong I was. It turns out the dating pool is a lot smaller. And I mean a lot smaller. And 9 out of 10 when I meet a girl that I'm interested in, she's not attracted to women. So, finally having enough, I decided to get a little bit of help sorting out who is and isn't on the table. I signed up for an app called Zoe. It's a dating app for women who are looking for other women. After signing up and making a profile, I was glad to see that there were tons of other girls looking for love out there that I just simply haven't met. I was a little excited because finding women who were actually interested in other women was the biggest roadblock that I've been having when it comes to my love life so far. With a pep in my step, I started my quest for love. I started matching and chatting with a few people and eventually started getting invested in one girl that lived in the town next to mine. Finding out how close she lives got me a little giddy, I'll admit it. My head filled with scenarios about the two of us. Can you tell that I was crushing hard? She was just so bold, flirty, and made me laugh out loud. Not to mention her picture. She was, to put it lightly, my exact type. So when I suggested that we finally meet and have a dinner date, I was elated when she agreed. I arrived at the restaurant about 10 minutes early. We had the date in her town and not mine, so I came early in case that I had trouble finding the place. I had spent way too long getting ready, but luckily, I still had time to spare. It wasn't any fancy restaurant, so we didn't need a reservation. I just walked in, and sat at a table and began to calmly wait. By calmly wait, I, of course, meant nervously fidgeting with my hair, getting self-conscious about messing up the said hair, and then checking my mirror to fix it, and then repeating the process again. But after repeating the cycle a few times and checking the time, I noticed that she was a few minutes late. Maybe she was having trouble finding the table, so I look around. But other than the family of 4 near the front door and the creep staring at me from the corner table, I didn't see anyone. I just assumed that she was running a bit late. After waiting a few more minutes, I sent her a text to ask if she was okay. There was no reply. However, the message said that it was read. Did she get cold feet? Did she stand me up? I started to feel like an idiot, spending hours stressing out about a date and even more time struggling with makeup. And now, here I am, alone in a restaurant with a random creep who's still staring at me between checking his phone once in a while. I want to go home. I try to calm myself down. Maybe she's driving here right now and she just can't reply. So I decided to give her a call just to check. As I pressed the call button, I heard a phone ring not too far away from me. The guy in the corner seemed to panic as his phone rang before he hit silent. And as he did that, I got a notification on my phone. The call was declined. The guy stared at me, and I stared back, beginning to get a bad feeling about him. I then packed up my things, and I quickly walked to my car. While walking, I turned around, and then I saw the creep jogging after me and calling my name. No thank you. I got into my car and drove off as he was a few meters away from me, still calling my name. I drove off and I went straight home. After which, I threw my stuff on the table, fell on top of my bed, and I cried. I felt stupid. After that, I contemplated deleting the app, but I decided to give it another try. And that's how I met my current girlfriend. So, to summarize, dating apps can be scary, but also sometimes bring people together. But you should always be careful. A number of years ago, I was pretty active in a few sites that were basically like mini social media pages that weren't very well known. There was one in particular that I really enjoyed. It was a page dedicated to a specific game that was a pretty big MMO, and I liked to lurk the boards and just kind of read what others were saying or what they were talking about. I did get active on the board at one point, and that's when I ended up having a conversation with a person that very quickly became my long-distance/online girlfriend, Amanda. I was young and still pretty naive about things and people on the internet, but she and I became pretty fast friends and had a lot in common. We talked a lot in direct messages on the site and discussed pretty much everything. She was the same age as me, 17, and she had a lot of the same issues that I had. Basically, she was just like me, and we hit it off pretty quickly and got close. We ended up agreeing that we should give it a shot to see what happens, and I was over the moon, because I have never been much of a social butterfly, and I had only one girlfriend in my life before this point, and that was in middle school for like 3 months. Obviously, the relationship started on the MMO board, and we chatted there a lot, and then it went over to email so that we could get a bit more personal. It wasn't anything lewd or anything of that sort. It was just us talking a bit more about ourselves and the things that we didn't feel comfortable throwing out there in a potentially unsecured forum platform. We emailed each other nonstop, and I tried to go a step further, and I tried asking her if she had a Facebook account so that we could be friends on there and then get a bit more into real-time communications. She told me that she didn't, and that she didn't feel safe using Facebook because it was watched. I asked her what she meant, and she told me that if you use Facebook, you were on a list of people that were being watched. I know that Facebook isn't exactly the best platform, and yeah, they're probably on the short list of pages that are checked by the government agencies. But they aren't interested in what me, a 17-year-old from the northern part of Mississippi, is doing. But I had to respect her opinion, no matter how strange it was, so I just said that it was okay and that we could keep talking through email. After a while, she ended up messaging me and asking for a picture of me because she, in her words, was really falling for me and needed to know what her Prince Charming looked like. If that message didn't make me swoon a bit, then nothing would. I went and I got my mom's digital camera and took probably the worst MySpace-style selfie that has ever existed. I was a bit of a scrawny kid, so I had to make myself look a little bigger than I really was. And with a bit of camera trickery, I made it work. When I sent it, she responded with a heart and told me that she was absolutely in love with me and just kept on complimenting me and telling me how amazing I was. Like I said, I was over the moon to have someone giving me this positive reinforcement on myself. At this point, you may be asking which part of this was the creepy part. And that's actually still coming. In fact, it's what happened next. I will say that I wasn't exactly super secure about my information. I wasn't paranoid or anything, but I did still keep some of my information hidden and secured. Like, I told Amanda my first name, and she knew how my last name started, just the first letter. She knew the city that I lived in, but that was pretty much it, outside of knowing what I looked like, I guess. I didn't anticipate that, with just my first name and last initial, the city and my appearance, that she could ever find me in person. But that is exactly what happened, kind of. A few weeks after Amanda and I had started dating and also chatting a lot, she kind of went silent on me. I was a bit concerned, but at the same time, I had sort of moved past the excitement of having this random person online compliment me. That may sound shallow to you, but that's pretty much all the conversations were. And after a bit, you kind of grow numb to the constant compliments. I kind of assumed that maybe she had moved on a bit from us as well and then left it at that. But then, on that really awkward Saturday afternoon, as I was sitting on the computer in the living room and playing The Sims, I heard a knock on the door. I assumed it was just the mailman delivering a package or something of that sort. So, I hopped up and I went over to the door and pulled it open. I had no idea who the person was that was standing there. The man on the other side of the door gave me a huge smile, said my name, and kind of gave me a bit of a squeal? It was a strange, happy sound, that much I remember. I kind of stared at this guy in confusion. I had no idea who he was or how the hell he knew my name. And I kind of said that to him like, hi, who are you? He then dropped a bombshell on me, which I'm sure you're all expecting at this point, and said that his name was Arnold and that he went by Amanda online. My heart sank. This middle-aged, overweight, balding man was my online girlfriend. Amanda had told me that she was my age and had described herself in detail, although admittedly, she never gave me any photos, which I now know why. Not a single word of the description she gave me included bald, middle-aged, overweight, male, or creep that would show up at my doorstep on a random Saturday. I replied to him with, "You're Amanda? The girl I met online, Amanda?" And he sort of shyly said, "Well, yeah, I know I'm probably not what you'd expect, but yeah, I'm her." Now, this is where things got really awkward. My dad walked into the room and asked me who it was at the door. I can't even begin to explain the feeling that hit me. I had no idea how to explain to my dad that this guy at the door was pretending to be a 17-year-old girl online and that we were dating, and he had somehow found where I lived and was now at the front door. I tried to say that he was just some guy, but then he cut me off and said to my dad, I love your son. I drove almost 10 hours to meet him." I am not going to get into the whole conversation or everything that had happened, but I will say that my dad was very confused and then very angry. Amanda, or I guess Arnold, tried to keep saying that we were lovers and that he was there to come and get me and that we were going to live together and a bunch of other really creepy things that didn't help with my situation at all. My dad then told Arnold that if he didn't get off the property, he was going to leave in an ambulance. And after a bunch of fighting and the police showing up, he did end up going. He hadn't actually done anything. There were no lewd comments made between us, no promises of anything, so technically, all he did was show up on the doorstep of a minor that he met online, which I guess isn't a crime in and of itself, so he was basically told to drive off. Obviously, that was the last time that me and Amanda, or Arnold, ever spoke, and I blocked his email. This was entirely too creepy and awkward for me, and it absolutely destroyed my trust in people online. I'm older now and a lot smarter about things, and I don't really have any reason to develop friendships online. One side effect of this is that I, now, just assume that everyone online is a 50-something-year-old balding man that's overweight, which has kind of become a running joke on the internet. If the situation wasn't so terrifying for me at that time, I could almost laugh at the fact that I lived through it. About 10 or so years ago, I had a stint in my life where I was really lonely, though I think maybe desperate is a better word. I guess I should say that I've had a few serious relationships throughout my life, but I hit 30 and I hit a major level of depression because the man that I thought that I was going to marry and be my husband decided that he wasn't ready for commitment. And then we went our separate ways. This was after a 4-year relationship, mind you. And while he said it was commitment issues, I'm pretty sure that he was just wanting to see someone else. It is what it is, and sure, I'm bitter about it, but I have to accept it and then move on. He is not who this story is about, though. Anyway, I was just out of that relationship, and then I turned 30 about 2 months later. And as I mentioned, I hit a pretty bad low in my life. I was in that I need companionship now kind of mentality, and I immediately leaned into making a profile for one of the online dating sites back then. I don't remember which one it was. It was whichever one was popular back in 2011, I think. Probably Plenty of Fish. But I remember it being a bit confusing. That, and it also kept trying to match me with people that were nothing like me. Nothing like reading a bio that it suggested and have it to be the polar opposite of yourself. I know, they say opposites attract. But when it says, no tall women and no women that like Harry Potter, and then my bio literally mentions that I'm taller than average and I'm a huge Potter lover, it almost feels like a joke to me. So after scrolling through all the bullshit, matching with a couple guys, messaging a few people, and really feeling like this was all a hopeless venture, I found a guy named Dan. Dan was exactly what I wanted in a man physically, and all his interests seemed to line up with mine. He had long black hair, looked to be taller than me, which was nice, although it never was a deal breaker. And all of his pictures had him wearing some pop culture referencing t-shirt that told me that he was absolutely into the things that I was into. I marked that I was interested, just hoping that he would mark the same on me. And much to my pleasure, he did. I instantly sent him a DM and I started it off with something corny, like, "Oh, your hair is gorgeous. I wish I could get mine to be as shiny and straight as yours." I know, dumb, but I was actually kind of jealous. He responded almost immediately with some joke response about how he had made a deal with the devil to have hair like this. His off-kilter humor was actually one of the things that made me really like him, and I was excited to get to know him. I may have been desperate, like I mentioned before, but something in my heart was telling me that Dan could be the one. Like, he could be exactly what I was looking for, and maybe we had a future together. And having these thoughts after just a few conversations may not be healthy, but there was really just something about him. We ended up talking on the phone a few times, and I started liking him even more. He had a beautiful singing voice. He told me he used to be in a band that was kind of popular locally, but never really went anywhere on the big stages. He told me that his last job was actually at an animal clinic, where he was tasked with keeping the animals company if they had to stay overnight or needed to be taken care of outside of the normal medical work. The more he told me, the more I absolutely adored this man. And after a while, I started having this weird nagging feeling in my mind. Why was he single? He was attractive, talented, entertaining, and loved animals. He was overall a really great and interesting guy. So why had no one scooped him up and put a ring on his finger? I actually brought this up, and he mentioned to me that things were complicated. I asked how complicated, mostly because that wasn't an answer that I was looking forward to. He responds by saying that he had a wife, and that things had recently gone sour, and so he no longer had a wife. That kind of made sense to me. He was married and things went bad, so he was out looking for someone else to fill that gap. I could relate, you know. We ended up talking about our past relationships. Or more so, I ended up talking about mine. He seemed a bit evasive, but I just assumed that he wasn't really feeling up to discussing it because it was so recent. And I was okay with that. It was nice to vent out some of my frustrations, and he was really good at listening and helping me see things more clearly. And then, the big day arrived. We had agreed to meet up for coffee on a Saturday morning at a local coffee shop. I got there, and he was already seated in the back waiting for me. It was actually really nice to meet him in person. He looked just like his photos. He had the same personality. He was the same funny and entertaining guy that I had come to know over these past couple of weeks. This was actually a huge relief because I was worried that I was going to get catfished. We enjoyed our coffee and companionship for a few hours, and then I had mentioned that it was getting to be midday and that I should probably be getting home at some point, but that I would absolutely love to meet up again and have dinner or something. This is when he mentioned to me that he had a great time as well, and then he kind of shyly looked down at the floor like something was wrong. I asked if he was okay, and he looked up and mentioned that he needed to ask me a favor. I said, of course, not really thinking about what the favor could be. But then he mentioned that he actually needed me to give him a ride somewhere if I could. I realized that he was already there when I got in, so I hadn't seen him pull up, and he actually seemed rather embarrassed at this request, which was almost cute. At this point though, I felt comfortable with him enough that having him in my car and driving him a few blocks to his apartment wasn't really that big of a deal to me. Plus, I was honestly thinking this could be a long-term thing if it kept up like it had. So I was more than willing to do so. I told him that it was fine and just kind of mentioned that I didn't know that he didn't have a car, and then mentioned that he didn't need to be embarrassed about it. He thanked me, and then we headed out to my car, and then we went to get him home. As we were driving, and he was pointing out where to turn, he started telling me more about his past and about how things had been rough recently. I asked if the divorce had been a bad one, and he then dropped a bombshell. He mentioned that he and his wife actually hadn't gotten a divorce. This killed me inside, and it made things make more sense. He wasn't actually divorced, he was still married. Sure, they could have been separated, but if he wasn't divorced, then it was likely that they could get back together or try to fix things, and then there would be no room for me in Dan's life. I kind of shut down a bit after this, and I just listened to him tell me about how bad things were between him and his wife, and not really paying attention to where he was telling me to go. And then he had me turn one more time and then turn into the parking lot of a police station. I parked and just kind of looked around confused. I asked why we were at the police station. It was then that he went really quiet and just sort of looked at the building and away from me. This whole situation was really weird, and I was honestly starting to feel freaked out. This is when Dan looked over at me and said that he really enjoyed the short time that we had together, and said that I was a lovely lady and that he was certain that I would find someone. He then said that he was about to go into the station and confess to doing something that was really, really bad, and that he was going to prison most likely for the rest of his life, and that if things had gone differently, he would have loved to have spent more time with me. I asked what he has done, what he was talking about, and he just sighed and said that it was an accident, that he never actually meant to hurt anyone, and then pushed my door open and walked into the building. I just sat there, watching him walk into the department with his head held high, and then he stopped at the front desk. I watched the whole thing play out from right there, watched him talk to the desk clerk, watched an officer walk up to him cautiously, and then watched as the officer put cuffs on him and then pulled him away from the desk. A few minutes later, another officer actually walked out to my car and then spoke with me. He asked me if I knew the man that had just walked in, how I knew him, if I knew what had happened, and I told him that we had just met online a couple weeks ago and that we had gone on our first date just that morning. I was more or less interrogated by the officer in the parking lot about Dan, and I told him all that I knew. And he told me that Dan had just walked in and told them that he needed to confess to murdering his wife. I obviously didn't know anything about that. I thought he was divorced. And after a bit more talking, they gave me a card, took my info, and then let me leave. At this point, it was a little more clear to me how Dan had a wife, past tense, but he wasn't divorced. And then it occurred to me that I had coffee with a murderer and even drove him to the station to turn himself in. I really don't know if our date was just him getting a free coffee and then a ride to the station, or if he was really interested in me. But either way, it was the most terrifying thing that has ever happened to me. Not because he was a creep to me, but because he was perfectly normal the whole time that we spoke during our date. This man was a murderer, but he seemed like a calm and complacent guy that was all there. That was just a normal person, you know? This was the only time that I ever went on a date with someone that I met online. And I actually shut down my account after that. I have been flirting, if you will, with online dating for probably the last 4 or 5 years now. And before you start feeling bad for me, it wasn't really consistent. I would go on a few dates that seemed fine, and then something would end up happening, or we just wouldn't click at all. So I would quit, get rid of the apps, and then delete my profiles. I would then try again, and unfortunately, the cycle would repeat. But I wasn't willing to give up yet. I still wanted to find someone that I could spend the rest of my life with. So I cleaned myself up and again updated my profiles ready to start searching. This was early 2022. I guess I was feeling more confident about myself and the state of the world as I went on another hiatus from mid-2020 till close to the end of 2021 for obvious reasons. I had a few matches, some that ended pretty quickly at the chatting part, but the others I was actually able to go out with. However, there was one girl that really drew me to her, and I thought that I was the luckiest man around when she actually agreed to a date. The girl's name was Kaylee. She had long, wavy hair that probably went about to her mid-back in a copper blonde color. She had soft green eyes that complemented the freckles on her face, but her smile and her laugh, well, it was really what did it for me. It was adorable. She had some kind of dumb joke on her profile, to which I had answered it correctly. Already off to a good start when they don't take it too seriously. We talked a bit, then even video chatted a few times before we finally went on a date. The first date went perfectly. We had dinner, then we walked around a dog park and then got ice cream nearby. It's normally here where I feel good about things, but then later on, I get a message through the dating site that it wouldn't work out for us and that I would have to start over. However, Kaylee surprised me when she said that she would love to do something again. So eventually, we had our second date where we went to a movie and arcade, which was a lot of fun. We started learning that we had a lot in common, especially in the type of music that we listened to. So, when she asked me if I would want to go to a concert with her for a band that we both enjoyed, I definitely agreed. I even offered to pay for both tickets or maybe just mine, but she refused, saying that she had already bought them. Now, I had never really gotten this far in the process, so I don't know how long this normally took for others. But this all happened within the span of a month. So, I dressed a little down from what I normally wore, picking a band shirt and jeans, and when I picked her up, she was wearing something similar, although it really looked much better on her. We decided to grab a few slices of pizza before the show, and we went to a local pizzeria that was probably about 45 minutes away from the venue. Unfortunately, as we were enjoying our pizza and each other's company, she got an email or a text about an electrical fire occurring at the venue, and until they knew if it was safe, all shows would be cancelled, starting from that night forward until further notice. We were both pretty disappointed because I think we were really both looking forward to it. And after moping a bit, I just suggested that we still drive around the area as we may be able to find some band members at a local bar or something. However, she had better ideas, and she suggested that we just go back to my place. This was not something I would have ever offered or have expected. The reason should be obvious, but being a guy, I never wanted to suggest anything, and I really didn't have much self-esteem. But she insisted, saying that we should make the most of the night. So, after we finished eating, we left, stopping only to get some cheap wine per her recommendation, and then headed back to my place. Once we got there, I played some music from the same band that we were supposed to see, and even put on a previous live performance on YouTube, trying to be funny or sweet, I guess. And after we talked for a while, things heated up, so we ended our night in the bedroom. That night was fantastic, and since we didn't work the next day, I was looking forward to spending the day with her. Yet, when I woke up that morning, the spot next to me was empty. I thought, well, no problem. Maybe she just got up before me and was in the bathroom. Or even, maybe she beat me to making breakfast. So, I got out of bed, walked past the bathroom to see the door open, so I went to the kitchen and noticed that it was empty too. I got a little discouraged at first, thinking that maybe she had left, but her purse was still sitting on the coffee table. Then, I heard a loud crash, and I realized I didn't check the spare room which I had made into my makeshift office. I quickly ran to the room, opening the door, and a flood of emotions ran through me as I saw Kaylee standing over what was my laptop, holding a hammer, as her face was a splotchy crying mess. When I was finally able to talk, I blurted out, "What the hell happened?" I know, I'm dumb. It was obvious, but for some reason, I still didn't want to believe it. In a shaky voice, she made comments about me seeing other people behind her back. I was confused by this because I hadn't been, so I tried to figure out what she was talking about. She said that she noticed my dating profile where we met and saw that I had gone on other dates other than her. However, I guess what she failed to see was that I hadn't gone on any other dates since I went on the first one with her. There were ones prior, yes, but I had 2 more lined up around the same time that we met, but I canceled on them because I was so into her. For some reason, none of this worked for her. Or maybe it was just too late. I don't know. But she kept screaming about how I was a liar and I was just using her. I again tried to reason with her and calm her down, but nothing was working. She snapped and said that I would pay for hurting her, and then charged at me with a hammer. I ran out to my room, holding the door shut behind me, hoping to buy me some time to think about what to do. That's when I could tell that she was swinging the hammer at the door. I let go of the door and I made a mad dash to the front door, running out of my apartment in only my boxers. I ran down the stairs and then started banging on the door to another apartment. There was an older lady that answered, and oh my God, I still feel awful to this day doing this to her. But I ran in, begging her to call the cops and trying to explain what had happened. I think she was already about to call 911 on me alone. I stayed by her front door, stopping myself from looking around her place, hoping that my pathetic self looked harmless to her, until I heard police knocking and calling out. I opened the door and I told them what happened, and then I led them to my apartment. They made me stay outside so they could get my side of things, while another cop went in to get her. After a short time, it was a small apartment after all, I heard shouting and what I assumed to be people struggling. They finally came out with her in handcuffs. She had on one of my t-shirts that she slept in, but also the zip-up jacket that I wore the night before. And when she saw me, she instantly became enraged that they had to calm her down again to get her in the car. They then had me walk through my place to see if anything was taken or if anything else was damaged. She ended up finding my phone and breaking it, and also smashed the picture that I had in my living room of me and my mom and sister. My dad died when I was young, so they were the only two people that were really significant to me. Oh, they also found her hanging off my balcony, talking about how she was going to jump. I lived on the second floor, so she may have had some broken bones if she did, but that was about it. Not to mention that it was grass below mine and not concrete. After all was said and done, I think I was confused and disappointed more than anything. I didn't press charges, but she bit the officer that detained her, so they had their own charges on her. I don't know what exactly changed or happened, nor will I probably ever know, but I felt bad for her more than anything. There was obviously something wrong or maybe something traumatic that happened to her to cause her to be like that, but I think she probably could have used help more than charges. In the end, I just got a cheap phone until tax season, and I replaced them both at that point. I don't know what happened to her, as she never tried to contact me again after that, but I do hope that she's doing better. But yeah, I'm taking a break from dating again. Hi, this event actually happened to me fairly recently, and I wanted to share with you after listening to some similar experiences. So, here it goes. I am in my late 40s, and the closest to a serious or long-term relationship that I've had was with my kid's father. I got pregnant at 16, which forced us into a marriage per our parents' demands. We were still kids ourselves and barely knew each other, so it was definitely difficult at first. But we slowly worked on ourselves to make sure that we were there for our little girl. But then we had another girl that wasn't necessarily planned, but also very welcomed. However, I had her when I was 30, so my girls are about 15 years apart. Thankfully, they get along regardless of the age difference, and I am incredibly blessed for them. Now, their father seemed to have two sides to him, so while he seemed ecstatic about our second daughter, I guess he was having a midlife crisis or something, and had burned through a bunch of our savings on his friend's wife, whom he also had an affair with. Anyways, long story short, we got a divorce. The girls both chose to stay with me, so good riddance, I guess. So, even though I've only been legally divorced for the last 2 years, I was already emotionally divorced or alone years prior. I was feeling pretty lonely, especially with one daughter already being grown up and moved out. So my oldest, Lacey, actually suggested that I put myself out there and try my hand at love again. I'm not the best with technology, but I can get myself around a computer. So she came over and got me set up on a site that she also had been using for herself. I had a few younger guys message me, but it was way too weird to me that guys were interested in me, that were closer to my daughter's age, you know? But I did finally come across a guy named Bill. He was 2 years older than me. He had 3 kids, close to the same age as my younger daughter, and said that his wife had died a few years prior, so he was looking to start over. We started talking through this site and even started talking over the phone. He seemed very family oriented, which made me feel even better about him. I also shared with him about my little family and how I ended up here. I told him about my 2 girls and he also seemed very interested. I've noticed while scrolling through people that there weren't a lot that were interested in a woman with kids at home, so I was relieved even more than anything when he asked about my daughters. He asked how old they were, their names. He asked about the things that they were interested in, and he seemed like he genuinely cared, which was already winning me over. So after about a month of talking, I finally got up the courage and agreed to meet him in person. We met at a local coffee shop that we're both familiar with and frequented often. And when we met, we hugged, and then I noticed he looked around me and asked where my daughter Molly was, my youngest. I told him that she was in school, as she was 15 at that time. It was a slightly odd question to me, as I knew he had kids around the same age, so I assumed that they were in school as well. I did let it go, however, as we did talk about her a lot, so I assumed he was just wanting to meet her too. So, we just talked for a while before we finally decided to leave. He was so kind, very funny, and had a very distinguished look. He reminded me of a slightly chubbier Downey Jr., so for my age, I thought that this worked out, then I got lucky. We continued talking and then met up for dinner a few nights after. This time, Molly was at a friend's house after a sports event, so she didn't join us again. Bill again made a comment about this, and I explained this to him, and he seemed kind of disappointed. I know it was just me being clouded by the situation, but again, I thought it was kind of sweet that he was so interested in meeting my kids. So I told him that we could look into scheduling something so we could both bring our kids, and he seemed to like the idea. It was probably about 2 weeks later, and the church that I volunteer at was doing a potluck dinner. Molly and I were already planning on going, and anyone was invited, so I thought that I would ask Bill to join us since there would be plenty of kids for them to play too. He happily agreed, and then we planned to meet there that night. However, when we all arrived, I saw him get out of his Jeep with what I assumed to be his youngest, only who was around 8 or 9. I asked him about the others and he said that they were all busy doing something else, so he had just the youngest with him. I knelt down to say hello, knowing their name already, but they were really shy. But that was understandable, you know. Bill quickly cut our conversation off though to ask where Molly was, and I told him that she was already inside helping out. I escorted him into the church and went to get Molly to introduce her. Molly knew that I have been talking to Bill, so she already knew what he looked like and a little about him from what I told her. She's also a very kind and outgoing girl, so when she approached us, she smiled and said hi, and Bill immediately pulled her in for a hug. She hugged back and even laughed. Again, I thought that it was a sweet moment, and I was really happy that they both seemed okay with each other. But then as the night progressed, I started noticing things that were making me uneasy. As we sat and talked while eating, he would talk to Molly, even more than me. He was asking her similar questions that he asked me on our coffee date. He asked her what she was interested in, what she liked to do, her goals and aspirations, all of it. Again, it just seemed like he cared about her feelings. But then it got weirder. He started asking her, with me present there, if she had a boyfriend. Molly and I were really close, so I knew that she was kind of seeing a boy at that time. They went to their school dance together, and then she answered him saying that yes, and then he said, "Aw, well, that boy is lucky to have a beautiful girl like you." She then smiled and thanked him. He continued to ask her more, but when I tried to ask about his son, he would hardly talk to me, and Bill would answer for him or stop me from being able to talk to him, which I found really odd. Feeling a bit weird, I decided to grab all of our plates and bring them to the kitchenette. I wasn't gone long when I came back, and Molly jumped up and said that she was going to help in the back and rushed off. I thought it was odd, but I decided to leave it alone for the moment. I went to sit down again, but then Bill then stood up saying that he had to leave, and after a quick half-hearted hug, he was gone. And with that, the whole night ended with this weird aura. On our way home from the church, I noticed Molly was extremely quiet, which was unlike her. I asked her if something was wrong, and after a deep breath, she said no. Well, I know her too well, and I know that there was something wrong, so I pushed, refusing to take that as an answer. Thankfully, it didn't take long to get it out of her. She said she didn't like Bill and that she didn't want me to see him anymore. She then explained the situation at the church, and it made me sick to my stomach. Bill had asked her if she was a virgin and if she had ever experimented with a boy or herself. She told me that she didn't know how to respond, so she just sat there and he told her that if she was ever curious, that she could talk to him about it. There were other little things he said, but as soon as she saw me coming, she left the conversation. I was horrified and disgusted. I had no reason to not believe her. Both of my girls were happy that I was willing to find someone, so she wasn't the type to try and mess this up, especially with this insane kind of a story. I apologized immensely to her, and I told her that it would never happen again. I messaged Bill that night and I tore him a new one. I told him that I was reporting him as well. He never messaged me back. I reported it to the authorities, but to my surprise, they couldn't even track the guy down. I had printed out his profile, so I at least had a photo of him, but his profile had been deleted. His phone number had also been disconnected. And after looking into the sky further, it all seemed made up. I don't know who I actually met, or even if that kid was even his. I was horrified that I brought this stranger around my daughter. I kept my promise and I told myself and my girls that if I ever meet someone else, I will make sure that I do a thorough check on him before they meet him. But I think I'm happy with just my girls, for the time being.
And here's the riddle for this video. Hello everyone, it's your creepy sister here. Thank you so much for watching the video. I really appreciate it. I would also like to give some extra love to my Patreon members, my channel members, and also my tippers. Thank you so much. If you would like to extend a little bit more support for the channel, don't forget to leave a like and a comment down below. If you would like to become a Patreon member, a channel member, a tipper, or even to buy merch, Check out the links in the description below. Again, thank you. And I hope you stay scared because your fear feeds me.